Well, hello. Thanks for coming back to check out another video. So, we are here today, I'm sure it's very apparent by the title, to talk about hypothetically panning a palette. Now, I've done this type of video in the past. I've tried to pan palettes in the past. I think I was only really successful in panning my first palette that I chose all the way back in, Lord, was that 2019? 2018, the Lorac Mega Pro 4. I think there were a few different reasons why I was so successful with that, and I'll kind of touch on that before we get into the palettes that I have to show you. But yeah, every year since the Mega Pro 4, I just feel like I've been less and less successful. I did not do a pan that palette this year, but I have to say, it is the project pan that I feel the most invested in. Like, I always look so forward to the beginning of each month so that I can see everyone's updates roll in. Like, I'm so excited for everyone. And then so I watch these videos, I watch everyone do their updates, and I'm like, I want to be a part of that. I want to pan a palette. I want to show the world that I can do it, you know? So it's kind of like where all this comes from, but I do go back and forth because now that I have like a larger palette collection, I struggle on finding the perfect palette. One where I feel like, okay, I can do full-on looks from this, but it's also a great companion palette because I really do enjoy pan those eyeshadows and, you know, putting just various eyeshadows into like other project pans with the goal to finish or hit pan on them that way. So I need that palette that's really well-rounded, that I can do a lot with, while also not being bored with, you know? So I will say here in the past like year, I've gotten way more adventurous with colorful eyeshadows. I know today's look would not suggest that, but that's neither here nor there. So I also like need a palette where it's not just neutral, but it has really fun colorful shades, but it's not just colorful shades, like it has really great grounding neutrals, because I go back and forth on like, nope, today is a neutral eye day look and I want to wear neutral eyeshadows, or no, today is like a pretty colorful, like I just want to put like the whole, you know, rainbow palette on my lids. So it's kind of my struggle. And then kind of like what I touched on with the size of my palette collection, with the way it is now, like I'm not overwhelmed with it. I do love all of the palettes that I have, but when you pan a palette, like you really do have to kind of like zero in and focus in on it so that you can make the progress that you want. And I think that's why I was so successful with the Lorac Mega Pro 4, because one, my collection was a lot smaller. Two, I loved that palette so much that I really didn't care to use it day in and day out. And then three, with the Lorac Mega Pro 4, now maybe Haley looking at that palette today would disagree, but for Haley back then, that was a perfect, colorful, but neutral palette. So I didn't feel like I got bored with it, you know? But either way, I have 4 palettes, I think, to show you that I'm considering hypothetically panning. So I will say all 4 of them are palettes that I absolutely love and adore. Some of them have more use on them than others, like some have more pans, so it would be kind of like a jumping off point. But yeah, I first want to talk to you guys about a palette that I think you think will be in this video, and it's not, and I want to go over why it's not. Okay, so the palette that I think that you think will be in this video, but it's not in this video, is the ABH Jackie Aina palette. I think this is going to shock people. This is one of my most favorite palettes within my collection, I do have to say. It is also one of my most used eyeshadow palettes. I have 10 pans as we sit here today, and I think that you guys are probably like, well, Haley, this is the perfect palette to pan because you have so much progress on it already. Like, this will be kind of easy. It'll go really quickly. You'll meet a lot of goals, and those are all very true and very valid things. However, every time that I use this palette consistently, like back to 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 back, okay, that's enough. Every time I use it pretty consistently for like, we'll say a month, I do get bored of this. I feel like while this looks like a really fun and colorful palette, it is a little bit one-noted. You have 3 browns and then 3 pinky purple shades too. And while I can get a lot of fun looks out of this and everything, I just, at a certain point, I hit the wall with like the creativity that this palette offers me, and I get bored with it, I get burnt out of it, and so I have to put it away for a while. and then I can bring it back out and I love it all over again. So it is still like a favorite palette. It is still a palette where I would recommend this if you were on the fence about it. It's just not a palette that you can pan, if that makes sense. Maybe you see it differently, and if you do, I think that's great. If you are panning this palette, let me know, because I would be super curious. I have not seen anyone pan this one, but I would just love to know how you feel about it. Like, am I right with my assessment? Like, it's pretty one-noted, you know? But yeah, so that's the palette where I think you think it'll be in this video, but it's not really in this video. Okay, so on the screen for you, I'm going to try to leave things like the total weight of the palette, how many pans are in it, all of that good stuff. I will say, I believe this one that I'm going to talk about first is the smallest palette. I do know it comes in at 8.6 grams. So it is the Nabla Dreamy 2 palette. I have owned this for maybe a year and a half, maybe not quite 2 years, I don't think. But it's a really pretty palette. I'm going to bring it in for you guys. This is the color story of it. As you can see, I do not have any pans on this palette whatsoever as of yet. So yeah, my biggest reason for wanting to pan this one is simply the weight of it. It's 8.6 grams. Like, I really think that if I just kind of, like I said, put a little bit of focus and effort on this, I could finish this one off. Two, I do actually really love the color story of this, and I love the formula of this. I do think this is a palette that leans on the neutral / colorful side. So it fits that like bill of what I'm looking for, where something that it'll be something that can like hold my interest in better than just a straight up colorful or a straight up neutral eyeshadow palette. I do think though some challenging shades within here will be like this Libertine shade. I absolutely love that shade. It is one of my favorite shadows, but it's still like a bronzy golden shade, and then you do have another bronzy golden shade up here in the corner, and then too, like this REM shade, like it's a really pretty purpley blue shade, and so is Mirabella down here. Now I will say REM is more on the like transparent topper side, whereas Mirabella is more of a like full-on really nice shimmer shade, but they're kind of in the same color family. So let's just say you pan REM first, like use it up to completion. Are you gonna like touch Mirabella? Is it gonna be like a struggle to reach for it, much like with the bronzy golden shades? You know, that's the only like real drawbacks of this palette, is that there are just some like not straight up repeat shades, but some very similar shadows within this palette that make me a little hesitant to commit to it. Okay, the next palette is one that I really love. It's a discontinued palette, and part of me is like, I want to pan it because I have already like put it back away in my collection. Like, no, Haley, don't touch it. Don't hit pan on any of those gorgeous eyeshadows because you can't get it again. So this is from Oden's Eye. This is the Solmåne palette. They did discontinue this first one, and they have since come out with a Solmåne 2 palette, which is really pretty, I will say. But this is what this one looks like on the inside, in case you are unfamiliar with it. I just really love this color story. I think this one is more on the neutral side than some of these other ones that we're going to talk about. However, it's the shimmer shadows in here that really do it for me. This one down here is definitely like the ABH Electric shade from Subculture. Such a pretty like fun green shadow. You do have these really like intimidating darker shimmer shadows here, so that would be a little bit of a challenge to actually try and like finish this one off, or finish these 2 shades off. But other than that, I feel like a lot of these colors are, or a lot of the shades in here are ones that I could incorporate at least daily in some way. You know, at least one shadow every day from this palette could be used. I think that's pretty helpful. I will say this is a huge palette. I think it has like 20+ grams of product in it. So this would definitely be something that would take longer than like the standard year that other people do try to pan palettes in. And I guess that's something I should have mentioned in the introduction, is that I wouldn't give myself like a year time frame. Like, we would just go until the palette goes, because my goal with panning a palette wouldn't be to just hit pan in every shade, but to actually finish off every eyeshadow within the palette. So, but yeah, the Solmåne palette, I just run the risk of like letting this sit there and collect dust in my collection because it's been discontinued, and I'm like, oh, but I want to savor it. Like, you know, I can't get this again, which is silly. So maybe this would be the push I need to like get over that. All right, let's talk about the only drugstore palette that is in here. Now, I will say, I know a lot of people would probably take price into consideration, and I think that's really fair. Like, you spend a lot of money on something, you really want to make sure that you get your dollars out of it, because if your eyeshadow palette that like cost $8 went bad on you, or you dropped it, or something happened to it, like, okay, it's sad and it's heartbreaking, and my heart goes out to you for dropping that $8 palette, but at the end of the day, it was just $8. Like, it's not the same as dropping something that's much more pricey, that, you know, or having that much more pricey palette like go off and expire before you put some good use on it. So I see the merit, is my point, in like taking into consideration price. However, I really didn't take into consideration price within this. It just so happens I only have one drugstore palette. Like I said in the introduction, my two biggest like things that I was looking at was like a kind of perfect colorful neutral palette, and then something that I also just see myself being able to really enjoy and put down a lot of good use in. So the third palette we will talk about is from ColourPop. This is the Limoncello palette. I feel, oh, I just had a shadow break out on me. Hold on. Well, that's one way to pan a palette. So the shadow that just crumbled out of nowhere was Vespa, which was a really nice chocolatey brown shadow, and I'm really upset that it is all over my floor right now, because that's my eyebrow shade that I've been using. I did have like a really nice pan in the center of it, and I had hit side pan on the corner here, so I don't know like why it crumbled out. Like, it wasn't unstable. I haven't dropped this palette. Like, kind of annoyed about that. You hurt my feelings, and now I really don't want to pan you. But anyway, so one shadow down. This is what the Limoncello palette looks like though. I do feel like this is a really pretty color story. However, much like with the Nabla palette, I do worry that I would get bored of this, because some of the shadows are super similar. Like there's these two like mid-tone browns. This one's more of like a mustardy kind of orangey yellow. So I think that one will be okay. And then this one's pretty deep, but that's as deep as the palette goes. And sometimes I want something a bit more darker and chocolatey, like the Vespa shade that now no longer exists. The other hesitation I have is that this blue eyeshadow, I've said this time and time again, it's that pop of blue effect, but it's done in such a weird way. Like, for me, this blue shadow, it just doesn't go with anything else within this palette. So that would probably be a shade that I would like pop out, move into my singles collection, and like not fuss with. But either way, I really do enjoy the shimmers in here. I will say though, I don't think that I am a straight up gold shimmer person like this shadow is, and I feel like I would get super tired of that one relatively quick. So while this does kind of fit the bill of like having some really fun, nice like colors in it, especially some of my most favorite like green shimmer shades like Easy Peasy and Capri, I just don't think that this one quite fits the bill of what I'm like looking for. But I would be interested to still potentially try to pan this one. Okay, one more palette to talk to you guys about. This is also a discontinued palette, much like the Solmåne palette. However, with this one, I do have 4 pans of eyeshadow within this palette already. I go back and forth. Like, every time I hit pan in this palette, I'm like, woo, new pan, like, yes. But then there's a part of me that's like, no, like, slow down. Do not hit any more pans in this palette. Like, you need to tuck this away and save it because it's discontinued. And that's so silly. So there's part of me that really would rank the Solmåne palette and this palette as like the top 2 contenders, simply because I think that's the push that I need to get over that hump of like, save your discontinued things because you love them so much, you know? So anyway, in saying all of that, you can probably guess that it is the Kaleidos Club Nebula palette that Angelica Nyqvist did. So if I hold this up for you guys right here, you can see like I do have 4 pans within this palette. Hopefully you can see that. I do have pan on the shimmery green shade, which is Firefly. I have pan on the matte green shade, which is Queen of Blades. I have pan on the like taupey kind of brown shade here, which is Naru, and then pan on the deep purple, which is Cylon. I also have a lot of good dips within this palette. I think, if I'm not mistaken, again, you're seeing it on the screen, this is the heaviest, like has the most product in it. So again, this would be with me for a while. This is not something that I could finish off in the year. But I think this one would honestly be a little bit easier to incorporate in a lot, like I said, because a lot of these like shimmer shades, you can wear them on their own and they're super pretty, but they're also like great topper shades. So you could top them off on other eyeshadows that you're like panning. It makes it a little bit more like unique and special because you can, again, like transform your eye look. So let's say you've worn Firefly, the green shimmer, like 3 days in a row and you're a little bit tired of it. It's fun to me to pull out like a different shimmer and put that down and then put Firefly on top of it and see what kind of color I get out of that, you know? So I will say too, out of all of the palettes, I feel like this one does the best job of meeting that criteria of being colorful but also neutral, because these like peaches and reds down here, I consider those to be more neutral shadows, but you can also pair them with other things and make them more colorful. Same with like the purples over here. That to me is like a neutral color, but depending on what you pair it with, you can make it like a more bright, fun, and colorful eye look. So I just feel like this palette too has endless color combinations. I've said this one before. I try to pull out this palette sometimes and make a bad eye look, and it's just not possible, at least in my opinion. Like every shadow in here goes together so well. Angie did such a good job creating this, and there's part of me that's like, it would just be fun to pan this little piece of makeup history, you know? Anyway, let me know down below like what you guys are thinking. Do you agree? Do you disagree? How did you, if you are panning a palette this year, what was like the reasons or like the main reason that you picked the palette that you picked? Like, just super curious. Again, I appreciate you being here and for sticking around until the end of the video. I hope you're having a good day, a good night, or a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.